Thanks to the Batman, we are soon going to once again see Edward Nygma, aka the Riddler, on the big screen, with actor Paul Dano seemingly bringing a much more grounded and dark version of the character. Looking at the most recent trailer for the movie got my brain juices a-flowing. There have been a ton of different versions of the green suit wearing criminal mastermind across movies, televisions, games, and of course comics. But which of them are the best ones? I think I've managed to throw together a pretty solid list. So let's go ahead and do one of those classic countdown lists and see if we can figure out which version of the Riddler is the absolute best of all time. Now, I'm sure that you're probably going to disagree with me on at least a few of these, which is perfectly fine. Great, in fact. It's all relative. I'd love to see your list down below. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into my list, starting at number 10. Okay, alright. Let's get this version of the character out of the way right out of the gate. I am not a fan of the Schumacher Batman films. I don't really think I'm alone on that. But I can't really argue that the Batman Forever version of Riddler isn't iconic in its own not so great way. For a lot of people, especially those in my age group, not to date myself or anything, this was probably our introduction to the character. So for a lot of us, this is the Riddler that our brain conjures up when we think of the character. That being said, this character kind of suffers from what I like to refer to as Joker-itis. Basically, after Jack Nicholson totally killed it with his version of the psychopathic clown prince of crime, every Batman villain for a while was presented as a manic, unpredictable ball of energy. The worst example of this actually comes from the same movie, with Two-Face coming across as some sort of a cheap Joker knockoff. Now, don't get me wrong, Riddler is totally off his rocker and can at times act very bombastic, but he's usually a lot more calculated and clear-headed, acting more collected and less random. He's not someone who's gonna blow you up on a whim or laugh maniacally while doing wacky stuff. It's not his style usually. So that's why this particular Riddler is so low on the list. I do really enjoy Jim Carrey's performance though, for what it is. Now this one might upset a few people, but I'm gonna have to put the original appearance of the Riddler pretty low on this list. Let me explain. Now, okay, this Riddler of course laid the groundwork for all of the future versions of the character, so he deserves all of our respect for that very reason. But we can't ignore the absurdity that is this character's backstory. See, a lot of comic characters have some amazing origins. Batman himself has one of the most memorable of all time. But you know what this Edward Nygma has for an origin story? What really motivates him? He got bored. See, Edward Nygma was a smart child, smart enough to figure out how to cheat at a puzzle competition in his youth. Figuring that he was smart enough to cheat his way through the rest of his life, he eventually turned to a life of crime, for the sole reason that he thought it would be a greater challenge to him than conning people at the carnival that he worked at. For the time in which this comic was published, back in 1948-ish, that was probably an acceptable backstory for a villain, especially a crazy one. But these days it just doesn't hold up, especially when compared to his more recent origin story that carries with it a bit more emotional weight. So for his contribution to comic history, and the fact that he is the original, he gets onto the list, but this is as far as he's going to go. The Riddler is an interesting part of Batman's rogues gallery. He is almost always presented as a villain, but he sometimes also serves as a bit of an uncomfortable ally as well. Due to being not completely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, Nygma often serves as a very valuable informant, serving as a sort of window into the minds of some of the Caped Crusaders' crazier enemies. He did this quite a few times, but I'm going to include his appearance in The Long Halloween on this list, due in large part to it being one of the more important and well-regarded Batman stories. In that comic arc, Batman turned to Edward Nygma in order to try to better understand the mind of the Holiday Killer, whom Riddler had actually had a run-in with shortly before, being spared by him on April Fool's Day. It's a great story and comes across as a fun take on Batman's relationship with the Riddler, something that I always enjoy seeing on the rare occasions that the two work together to any sort of degree. While he wasn't a huge part of the story, that's why I am including the Long Halloween version of Riddler on this list. Batman Earth 1 gave us perhaps one of the most sadistic and twisted versions of the Riddler that we've ever seen on the page. In this comic series, Edward Nygma is presented as a serial killer who puts people in horrific puzzles, promising that they would be spared if they could figure their way out of things, solving his riddles and challenges. It's kind of like a comic book version of Jigsaw from the Saw franchise. Except, unlike John Kramer, who has a set of ethics that requires him to actually let people go, Riddler's promise is a flat-out lie. He kills people regardless of if they solve his puzzles or not. He is also obsessed with figuring out Batman's identity, so much so that he winds up going on a killing spree simply to try to get the Bat's attention so that he can study him closer. This makes for a really interesting and fairly horrifying take on the character, and something I'd be interested to see more of. Definitely seems like it might be something that inspired the Batman, as that Riddler looks to be a lot darker than usual. So who knows? Maybe he'll wind up asking Batman if he wants to play a game. Okay, so I know that I kind of ripped on the Batman Forever Riddler for being kooky and over the top earlier on in this list, and that the Riddler for the 1960s Batman show is kind of in the same boat. But there is a reason why this one is higher up in my mind, and it all comes down to the performance of Frank Gorshin. Gorshin managed to take the campy, goofy styling of the 60s show and run with it, giving us a Riddler that takes every action with a sort of twisted, demented glee that is an absolute delight to watch every single time I see one of the episodes playing on TV Land while I'm scrolling through channels. His manic portrayal of the character is simply iconic, with his sort of basic green spandex suit and giant black question mark being burned into the minds of viewers for generations. So yes, even though it suffers from a lot of the same complaints that I have about Jim Carrey's Riddler, Gorshin's version gets the 6th spot based simply off of the performance of the actor. That and the historical significance of the show upon which he appears. Sometimes it helps to be older. It does seem like it's about time that a video game made its way onto this list, and the Arkham games more than earned their spot with their version of Riddler. Arkham Asylum's Metroidvania-style gameplay is about as close to perfection as you can really get, and the ever-present Riddler trophies go a long way towards boosting its already amazing and engaging gameplay. This version of Riddler is much more street-level than usual, rocking a filthier look than pretty much any other, seeming like a mechanic of some sort after a hard day's work. This Riddler has strewn about the asylum a metric buttload of tiny Riddler trophies that encourage players to not only explore new areas that they might not have otherwise, but also challenge their skills in ways that they might not have thought about during the main plot. It's a fantastic bit of game design, and a great way to integrate the character's less combat-focused style into the game. A brilliant bit of work on the part of the developers, Rocksteady. And his appearance in later games only builds upon what was established in the first, with the final game, Arkham Knight, introducing a side plot involving a captured Catwoman that is easily a highlight of the game in my opinion. And yes, I actually liked Arkham Knight, Bat Tank segments and all. If you're one of those people that slept on the game because you thought it was too focused on driving or shooting, I think you should go back and give it a shot again. It's totally worth it. Alright, tangent over, back to talking about the weird dude with the green suit. Batman Hush gave us a version of the Riddler that was almost tragic enough to be sympathetic. In the graphic novel, it is revealed that Nygma suffers from a rather large and super nasty brain tumor that will kill him if not treated in some way. The means by which he winds up treating this ailment is by using Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus Pit, which seems to do the trick. But anyone who knows anything about Lazarus Pits will tell you that taking a dip in one of those comes with some rather nasty side effects. In Nygma's case, he winds up having a bit of a psychotic break. However, during this break, he actually manages to deduce the identity of Batman, a revolution that he shared with Thomas Elliot, aka Hush. The two of them then hatched a plan to do what might be one of the most sadistic things Riddler has ever been a part of. He got Clayface to take on the appearance of Batman's former protege, Jason Todd, in order to try to torment the Caped Crusader. Later on in the story, when Riddler winds up threatening Batman with revealing his secret identity to the public, Bats turns it around on him, reminding him that a solved riddle is effectively worthless, which might just be the best possible way out of that situation when dealing with a puzzle-obsessed lunatic. This Riddler is just so interesting and unique that I couldn't not have him on the list. It's often pretty easy to forget that Riddler is supposed to be taken seriously as a villain, and having him do something so heinous as try to psychologically torment Bruce Wayne in such a way goes a long way towards reminding us that he can be a true monster when he really sets his mind to it. My love for Hush as a storyline also probably had something to do with it too, I guess. What happens when a man like Riddler is cured of his insanity? Well, the Riddler reformed story arc in the comics sought to answer that very question. After nearly a year spent in a coma, Nygma awakens and finds that his sanity has been restored. However, while his insanity was gone, he still had his genius-level intellect and massive ego. Thinking highly of himself, he set out to become the best private detective in the world. Hired by a rich businessman to investigate the murder of a young socialite, Nygma actually wound up working alongside both Bruce Wayne and Batman, not knowing that the two of them are actually one and the same due to the brain damage that put him in the coma, removing large parts of his memory. He actually got a bit chummy with Wayne, even attending a party aboard a yacht with him before someone on board fell overboard and was eaten by sharks. You know, same old in Gotham. Nygma wound up spending quite a while seemingly on the good side of things, serving as a sort of superhero in his own right, once again donning the green suit, only this time for good. He did eventually wind up returning to villainy though, because of course he did. Don't ever trust comics to do anything outside of the status quo for too long. You just can't be too unexpected, I guess. That being said, I always get a kick out of it when writers decide to let villains be heroes for a bit. And I mean really heroes, not just anti-heroes like the Suicide Squad. So seeing Nygma get his chance at a bit of a redemption arc helps place this version of the character pretty high up on this list. Okay, come on, you knew that the animated series version of Riddler just had to appear on this list somewhere, right? This version of the character first appeared in the episode If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? And gave us the animated adaptation of one of my favorite versions of the character's backstory. Basically, Edward Nygma was an intelligent inventor who was unjustly fired by a greedy employer, causing him to turn to a life of crime in order to seek vengeance and some form of validation. Over the course of many different appearances throughout the show's run, Riddler managed to shine among some of the most iconic versions of Batman's rogues gallery, which is no easy feat. It's worth remembering that this was the show that actually introduced Harley Quinn, probably the most popular Batman villain outside of Joker. And giving this entry even more weight is the fact that for a lot of people, this is the Riddler that they were introduced to the character with. This is the Riddler so many people think of when the character is brought up. So of course he's going to be on this list. And of course he's going to be super high up. However, he is beat out by one more version of Riddler that in my opinion might just be the best one of all. Just because the 0-year version of Riddler is one of the more recent versions of the character doesn't mean you should discount him immediately, because this might just be one of the most interesting and fun to read versions ever put to the page. Before donning the question mark covered suit, Ed Nygma was an inventor working for Wayne Enterprises, and he had a pretty bright future at the company, with schemes set in motion that were set to help him rise to the top. That is, until young Bruce Wayne returned to Gotham City, and set about trying to uproot all of Nygma's best laid plans. In an attempt to maintain his position, Nygma sent out a gang of goons to attempt to assassinate Wayne, which obviously failed because, come on, he's Batman. Leaving Wayne Enterprises in defeat, Nygma donned the mantle of Riddler and set about enacting a dastardly scheme on Gotham. He managed to cut all power to the city and set up a sort of twisted survival game, telling the citizens of the city to either smarten up and solve his riddles and traps or die. This was all in an effort to try to eliminate the less intelligent members of the population, which Riddler thought were dumbing down the world to an unacceptable degree. Naturally, he was eventually taken down by Batman, though it took the combined brainpower of the Cape Crusader and Lucius Fox, as well as the cooperation of Commissioner Gordon, for the Bat to ultimately find Riddler's hidden lair. This modern version of Riddler combines pretty much everything I like in the best versions from the past. One of the best backstories, a sadistic plot that really puts the heroes to the test, and a fun bit of back and forth between Riddler and Batman at the end. What's not to love? Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I actually made this video, and I want to know what you think. How would you rank the Riddlers? Was there one that I missed that should be on here? Let me know in the comments below or shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos in the future.